Well, I am going to be real honest. I come to the table somewhat unprepared, but I just caught wind of a new bill that was introduced, something along the lines of safe water. I'm going to pull it up while we're talking, but basically trying to outlaw shark diving again.
I saw
So,
that from Tanner, yeah.
yeah, and my friend Tanya is over in Jupiter. She messaged me about it as well, and I'm gonna try and hopefully she'll be at the meeting tonight at 7:30 to kind of give everyone the debrief of like the history of these bills that have popped up in the past, and how they've been shut down because none of them have like no regulations have really successfully been made around this subject because it is a tricky one. I mean, even I have a hard time like I have no answers to how we seriously because I think the concern is like somewhat legitimate. I don't think everyone needs to be out in the ocean feeding sharks to take people diving with them in the water. Um, but I can't necessarily say that this is as simple as that. Like I haven't read the bill yet. I got to see what's going on. I just know that I'm going to be heartbroken if all of a sudden it's just like you can't take a boat out to go diving with sharks. I mean,
Right. Well,
that's
I
like
think
telling people not to do drugs. People are still going to do it.
well,
Like,
I think the idea is because there's obviously just straight chum in the water, which that's one thing. Then there's another
yeah.
thing you can do with shark diving, which is enticing, I guess put it that way. And the big argument is, and I go to the spot in Jupiter all the time, so I know exactly what they're talking about. And I've talked to people on, I guess you could say, both sides of the issue.
Mhm.
And I never want to see shark diving ever limited. I mean, making it more ethical, sure. The optimal form to shark dive is obviously with no food or no enticing.
Right.
But the reality is, with tourism, with all that, to really see a shark and all that, sometimes you have to. And one of the tricky things is making sure it's not too much. And then one of the problems is now is, fishermen, rightfully so, they'll go off of Jupiter on the Juno Ledge, which is, the furthest eastern point in Florida that sticks out the most in the Gulf Stream. You have rich abundance of nutrients that kick up a bunch of, other prey species. It brings in sharks. It brings in, biodiverse ocean life. But they get out there and within 5 minutes there's sharks because the sharks associate boats with food, and that comes either from divers or people chumming the water. So that's where the issue really comes is fishermen don't want to be out there and have a bunch of sharks around their boat, especially since a lot of shark populations, and I would argue there many shark populations are doing fantastically well. And it's a good thing. It's good we have shark populations rebounding like bull sharks, but it gets tricky because you can legally harvest bull shark. It has to be over 54 inches. It has to be on hook and line. I think it's one per vessel each day. And that's where you get some, you could say, conservationists or divers say, like, some people just never want to see a shark being hurt or killed, which is fair. I mean, it's a cool animal. But we have so many sharks now. We have the problem of some fishermen just don't want to go out there and see a bunch of sharks. So that's where this really stems down to, I think.
Well, I don't know if we can seriously say that there's a population boom in sharks. It's funny because I edit Shark Girl Madison's podcast, Shark Stories, and she just released an episode regarding the boom in sharks. Is there really a boom in shark populations? And I think really what we're seeing is a shift in where they spend their time, what they eat. I mean, they're smart creatures. They're going to go for the low-hanging fruit because that's what all I mean, sharks have, what is it, outlived five global extinctions, I think?
Yeah,
Four or five. It's one
yeah,
or the
yeah.
other. So, like, it's a really well developed species and, whatever. Like, they're not going to struggle to make smart decisions. Um, so I think what we're probably seeing is more of just the crossover in environment of shark populations and humans, not truly a boom in shark populations. I would have to look into it, but like the studies we probably have access to, I'm assuming are done by the FWC. I'm assuming, are decent science, but it's like there's good science and then there's great science. And in order to do great science, you really need time. And I can't say that we've had enough time to seriously be able to make a judgment call and say, oh, this is a population boom that needs to be hunted, for example, in order to be conserved or to have appropriate population measured, you know, taken into account. I don't
I
know
don't
that we
think
can say
anyone's making
that.
necessarily argument that like I think part of it is there's worldwide sharks are having a big problem. Most
Yes.
marine species, like one of the worst cases for conservation is marine conservation. But
Yes.
that's globally. When we look at, shark populations off Southeast Asia or like their version of the manatee over there, awful, pretty much gone. But Florida, fortunately there are some success stories here where And you can certainly have a much higher occurrence of sharks here, or they are moving with, easy access to prey, which could be fishing, could be, because when you're fishing, you're bring the fish is in the water for it could be hours, and that's bringing in sharks as well. So it could be there's a lot more sharks maybe being concentrated here, but obviously, yeah, I agree. That doesn't mean that sharks as a whole, or even in the whole Western Hemisphere, are doing.
Right. I
Yeah,
will
there
say though
are.
that the attitude of Florida sharks though in particular, and this is something that Pip pointed out in that podcast episode, is that Florida sharks have different behavioral patterns compared to sharks around the world. I mean, this is someone who's been diving with sharks globally her arguably her whole life.
Right. She might have
Um,
bias though. Just gonna point that out there
Yeah,
though.
yeah,
there's
for sure. But I think it's something unique to Florida sharks, is what I'm getting at, is that
right.
because the fishermen aren't wrong. I mean, I've been on enough boats to know that when people reel in a fish, it's like the tax man's becoming a problem
Hmm.
in their eyes, and that's fair. And, having just gone on a shark dive myself a couple weeks ago, there was cold upwelling that day. We didn't have sharks in the water. I mean, Emily can speak. We both went. So, like, we can kind of speak to the fact that it's not just the boat in the water. It's not even chum or, pieces of fish in the water that are going to bring sharks about. And if we start regulating shark diving, I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't like, I don't know if we should have that day necessarily been baiting the water to try and get sharks to show
Yeah, how
up.
about yeah, real quick. How about just talk about that like experience with sharks and whatnot? Because I think for you and Emily, I mean, to my knowledge, you guys don't go shark diving all the time, but like, just share how that was. Like, how was it just overall?
You go first, Em.
Well, I didn't really know I was going there.
Surprise!
Caitlin surprised that. But I'm really glad that we went. It was my first time actually doing that. I have been in the water with sharks before, but not on purpose. So, um, again, it was very cold in the water, so it did take a while for sharks to even show up to our boat. So, like Caitlin said, it's not like we took the boat out there and there were swarms of sharks around. So, this idea of feeding them, I'm not sure. Maybe in some situations, if the water's warmer, there could be, I don't know how many sharks, 20, 30, but that just wasn't our experience. So, yeah, I think it was fun. What do you
Yeah,
think?
it's not the like we were there for my maternity pictures because I want my daughter to know that her mom's a badass, right? But that's a cultural perception, not necessarily my own. I've gone shark diving in the past before when it was kind of still new to like modern day life, like pop culture wasn't really onto it yet. Um, but sharks, like I see what I see when we go shark diving, right, is that these sharks don't really know what to do with you. You're kind of just this thing that's just about as big as them, maybe a little bit smaller, but probably not, in the water, and they're just trying to like feel you out, see what's going on. But if there wasn't food being given to them in the mix, I don't know that they would hang out. Like, I don't think there would be much interest taken into us being in the water. So I see where like the dynamic of, these shark tourism dives have to do some form of interaction with the shark directly to keep its attention. Because otherwise we're just boring. Like, they don't want anything to
Yeah,
do with us.
sharks. Yeah, a shark isn't looking to eat humans. It's certainly not, especially at least
God, no.
in our
No,
side of the
especially not
street.
here. Most of the
Yeah, like
sharks that are
yeah.
Yeah,
sorry.
we dealt with a lot of like silkies. We had some juvenile bulls which were more interested in us, but I think it's just because of the juvenile nature more so than even the species nature. Um, because I mean, anytime I've been in the water with a small shark, they tend to get a little closer than the big sharks do. So it's just like I don't, but I'm not a shark behavioral analysis person. Long story short, in all of this, my concern with this bill is that if it's driven by too much bias and not enough good science, this is going to be a bill that we are going to have to spend probably decades deconstructing to get into a place that's actually like beneficial for the sharks, beneficial for the human beings around them, and actually have some sort of meaningful impact on the environment in general.
Oh,
So I'm
you,
curious to read this thing and see what exactly the stipulations are.
yeah, I'd like to see that too. Speaking of which, when you say good science, it's sharks are fish. I know that's shocking,
Cartilaginous fish.
but yes, but they are fish. Um, they don't breed in the same, I mean, the same way. They don't have as many babies as the average fish species does. Um, so their reproduction numbers are slower, but at the same time, um, a lot of them don't stay in the same spot. A lot of them migrate. If you know anything about the mullet run, you know that during the fall and the spring when the mullet are moving back and forth from cooler to warmer waters up and down the coast, you have groups of multiple species of sharks, but mostly like black tips and spinners that follow them up and down the coast, and behind them are usually like greater hammerheads, and because they eat the other sharks, they eat tarpon, they eat all the other bigger stuff, stingrays, all that. Anyway, the point is that there are certain, like you were talking about how it was colder when you went there. The temperature is key. I used to do a lot of land-based shark fishing, and during the colder times of the year, you'd get a lot of sandbar sharks, silkies. Um, you might get a bull shark, but it's not really like that. Wasn't as common. But during the summer, you could get a bull shark, a hammerhead, a tiger. You never know what you're going to get. The warmer water definitely brings them in. So it could literally have just been specifically that day the temperatures just weren't right. Because as I said, they're fish. That's just the way fishing goes sometimes. Temperature is everything.
Yeah,
So,
it was a
and
significant drop too, probably like 15 degrees in the water column. Like down
um,
by 80 feet, it was probably like 68-degree water. It was cold.
yeah, which isn't that, it's pretty cold, but around
For
72
Florida.
is not, you'd be surprised. It depends on the time of year.
Okay,
Um,
for me, Dean, it was
oh,
cold.
I think the
That's
water
one
would be
thing.
cold. 70-degree water is freezing to me, but like if you look at the temperatures and keep track of them, especially in those deeper waters, I mean it does get colder than that. Anyway, with that being said, um, you talk about FWC and like making sure that the numbers are good. As I said, sharks move. There are places all over the world where sharks numbers are declining. It's just it's happening for many reasons. But here in Florida, in the United States in general, we do a very good job of protecting many species. And I know that doesn't sound right because people like to. There might be some issues moving forward, but overall, the United States does a very good job of protecting species. We look at the Goliath grouper as an example. In the 90s, almost completely wiped out.
Yeah.
Almost completely wiped out. Now, they're so numerous that the people are complaining the same issue with the sharks. You can't go to a single reef, try to pull up a fish without a Goliath grouper, and I'm using the PC term because I know people don't like. I use the other term, but I'm
Come
using the
on,
PC
Dean.
term.
Throw it out there.
The Jewfish. It is the Jewfish. There's no. That is what I call it. That is what it is. Anyway, with that being said, their numbers are so hot, like doing so well now that there is a season for them. Now it is like a lottery system, and you can only keep a certain size. But the point is that their numbers have rebounded. Shark numbers have rebounded in Florida. Now that doesn't mean you go down to the West Indies, in the Caribbean, and they have the populations may not be the same. But you also can't take the population of somewhere halfway across the world, which might have the same species of shark, like a black tip shark, and be like, well, their populations are low there, so Florida has to keep them high because that those populations don't meet. So we have to keep that in mind. It's the same. I'll wrap this up. It's the same argument when people freak out about the red snapper population. So red snapper, obviously a
I don't
super
even want
big.
to talk about the red snapper right now because I'm so disgruntled with Rodney
Well,
Barbo.
the red
That's
snapper are
like his
doing great
pride
in
and joy.
Florida.
That's his like one win he had.
What,
I'm
DeSantis?
sorry.
Wait, did you say DeSantis?
No, Rodney Barretto.
Oh, Rodney Barretto. Well, that's DeSantis, not Barretto.
Well, whatever. Both of them then. I just,
Which
red
is fine. I
snapper
mean,
has
it
been
is a good
ruined for me.
thing. Our red snapper Okay, I don't know how much you've done bottom fishing or fish for snapper in general, but I remember, I mean, within the past 10 years, you'd go out there and they cut the season down to like a 2-day period or something. Like it was a ridiculous on the golf side, ridiculous. People were pulling red snappers like crazy. You couldn't get away from them. You had to throw them back every single time, and it's just like they're everywhere. And they're like, no, no, we have to make sure that the commercial fishermen get them because the people love to eat them. Well, we were also basing our numbers off of numbers from Louisiana. And it's like, yeah, it's the Gulf, it's the same water, but Louisiana is a different state. That's a whole different population base. We have a lot more fish over here, and they end up changing it now that. But anyway, the populations are good in certain things. So I think the shark thing, um, it's either we let people fish for them more and take more of them, or you stop with the chumming and swimming with the sharks
Yeah.
because you're creating that incentive that people love to complain about with everything else. You feed an
Yeah.
alligator, people freak out. You go
Yeah.
over in Southeast Asia, they're feeding the whale sharks and doing the swims with them, and people are like, "This is so inhumane. This is terrible." But it's okay to do it because you want to swim with the shark. Like, I I I don't have an issue with it, but you can't have both.
Yeah, not an
Right. And I
extreme.
think like a couple things, even on the, because one of the points that they kind of bring up this bill and kind of like the fears is just like kind of the sentiment and propulsion for a piece of legislation like this. And every time it happens is kind of like really building on people's current perception of sharks. And
Yeah.
like so Florida does have so New Smyrna Beach, which is a couple just north of Palm Beach, 100 or 200 miles. Um, it's like within the top five, certainly the top 10, but maybe the top five are
It's
like
the
quote.
number one. It's the
Yeah,
number
number
Yeah.
one.
one.
Yeah,
Members
number
love
Well,
Shark Tank.
I didn't want to be really wrong, so I'm really thinking. It's the one
Yeah.
deadliest beach for shark attacks, and one of the honestly, the good things to know about sharks with attacks is the fact that if you can see the animal clearly and it knows you're there, the likelihood of attack is very, very low. If it knows you're there, it can see you. Whereas, if you're surfing or you're right on the water's edge, it can only see part of you, or you're moving fast through the water, you're on a board, it looks like a seal. All those factors make it more of, I don't really know what I'm biting, but it's moving and I'm hungry and shark's a predator, so it's gonna go after something that's moving fast and has its back towards it. Where anytime you go in the water, whether if you go solo or you go with a group, what you never want to do is turn your back away from a shark or move frantically or look like prey, essentially. So, kind of the fears, maybe the propulsion of misconceptions around sharks for this piece of legislation, maybe others similar to it, is that sharks can certainly be, you can have a safe experience in the water with a shark.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of, and I guess on a second point is right, it was like last week or 2 weeks ago off Key West. Let's find the article again. But there was this video, this guy, he got really irritated with it was a bull shark and essentially was
Key
harassed.
West.
Yeah,
You know
Key
the
West.
captain, crazy enough.
Yeah, I mean, like that's
He
selective bias.
stabbed it though, didn't he? He stabbed it a
Yeah,
bunch of times.
yeah,
Tons
so
of
it was
times.
irritating him, and they like stabbed him a bunch of times with a knife. And it's that. I mean, obviously, that's the stuff where it's like that's for not only is it uncalled for, but it puts a bad name, and it just really when you see the video too. I think it's on one of the news sites. It was still up, but I
Oh,
mean,
it's
it's awful to
everywhere.
watch. And that's one of the things. Like, if you're frustrated, like we could see, yeah, you're frustrated if you're fishing for hours and the same shark keeps bothering you, but obviously that's never okay. And it's also odd, if you really, I mean, sharks can still be, I mean, they've been harvestable for a while now, I think. It wasn't like a really, really recent thing. So that's possible. And I think, yeah, to Dean's point, you're going to get kind of, either you have to manage more of the shark population, at least
Yeah.
Florida ones, or, you know, still
I
allow for the diving. I don't think you can cancel
I
out both
just don't
because it's too
know.
many
Yeah.
animals.
I'm not convinced that, and this is my problem with how a lot of like politicians I feel like get culturally guppied in to dealing with problems in a way that feels like they're going to satisfy the group of people calling for change, right? And so you have a bunch of fishermen, basically. I mean, sorry to use a blanket term, but people who are not shark divers, who are actively in the water, usually fishing, fishermen, saying, hey, there's too many sharks. I can't get a fish back to my boat. It's because ever since these guys started taking boats out and baiting for the fish, they all think it's a cheap, easy, free meal. Now that every time they hear the sound of my engine, it's game over. I can't fish. So I hear that. But what I think that they are, it's easiest to blame it on shark populations than it is to say, okay, I, as someone who can create legislation for people, I am going to look at this problem from a completely removed perspective and say, what does the science say here? And I don't think the science is going to directly point fingers at the population being the problem. I really do think that in this case, we're going to need more realistic regulations on shark diving boats to ensure that the behaviors that we're training and encouraging sharks into aren't behaviors that are breaking cycles of natural hunting. And unfortunately, I do think that this is seriously going to point the finger at baiting for shark dives.
I don't
And
think it's
I
going to
don't
matter.
know.
I don't think
What,
it's going to
what do you
matter.
mean?
The tricky thing is like if you're having boats in the area and people in the area, and people in the water being the divers, both are. I mean, obviously putting bait directly in the water for diving with them is obviously a stimulant, but also I would argue trawling up fish or having fish online for a couple hours is also going to have the same thing. And problem is both parties in their own right. I mean, I want to be able to go fish on Juneau Ledge, but I also want to go and dive with sharks on Juneau Ledge, and that's many people's
Right.
thoughts as well. You I would see you're really because the bill, what it wants to do, I think it's 200 nautical miles out where you can't be doing essentially the traditional method of shark diving, which that would essentially just cancel that whole thing out. And mind you, a lot of these outfits that do this is tons in Jupiter, tons in West Palm, tons that go out from a bit south. But a lot of it, like it or not, or however your views on it, a lot of that money goes back into conservation, education, and most people don't really get to see a shark in the water in a good environment except for doing something like this. You can't do it in an aquarium. You can't obviously can't go to SeaWorld or anything like that. You can't just house sharks there. And they're not going to see it from the same as, going on a fishing trip because generally you don't want to be jumping in the water when you're fishing,
No.
Right,
You,
right.
you know that thing that, and this is a terrible situation that happened, but the dude who shot and poisoned the dolphins. You
Yeah.
hear
Yeah,
about that? Okay.
yeah,
I don't know. I'm sure you guys do know, but dolphins are just as bad as sharks are when it comes to this.
right.
They are no different.
They're
The,
not demonized because they're not sharks.
exactly. Dolphins are the
Right.
exact same way. Obviously, I'm not advocating for killing dolphins. I don't like dolphins personally. That's just my experiences with them, but I don't advocate for killing them. They're cetaceans. I no cetaceans at all should be killed. I'm under
Well,
that
and just when
impression.
you're talking about
But
apex predators, they shouldn't be killed.
I
Like you can't have imbalance in a food
see. I don't agree with that.
ecosystem.
I don't agree
Oof,
with that. I
I
don't
don't
agree with
know.
that. I there is the issue is that a lot of apex predators have been hunted down because they're apex predators, and those species that don't have good populations should not be hunted. When you get to
How do
a
you know? How do you know, based off the science that we have today, that you can say with certainty it's the right choice to allow an apex predator on the rise to be hunted again?
as long as the populations are sustainable, it's
I
no
don't think
different than
there's
any
been
other
enough
animal.
science to say that the populations are sustainable. It's like saying,
I'm
like
talking
Bob was
about any
saying in
animal in
Florida.
general. I'm not talking about
Me
just
too.
Well, that's one of the interesting things with science is, especially when it enters the realm of politics, and you could argue, I mean, culture, politics is downstream of culture, but you could argue, no matter how much scientific data or whatnot there is, science doesn't always. It can give you the data and like what's going on, but it doesn't always tell you the moral or the feelings around why people are pushing towards things, and
yeah.
that's arguably we can have all the data. We can see many things in history or in recent times where you could say, well, the data was on this, the data was on that. I thought this, but people's perceptions of those data sets is what really pushed or went against so that's why like, feelings around a dolphin are dolphins are never going to be treated like sharks and like
Not in the,
elephants
maybe
and
not in the US, but
yeah. Like
in other
species are
countries
always
that's
going
not
to
true.
be personified to a good degree. Like, there's too many elephants in Botswana right now, but no one's, marching for the culling of hundreds of elephants for a reason. But if it was like a bunch of rats overrunning a city, who cares? Let's call them, you know.
Right,
Well,
but
and
science
all
typically points at the answer to all of this.
no,
And
it
if we
doesn't.
don't stop the
Yeah.
bleeding, if we can't stop the bleeding in an environment, right? I mean, we could boil this conversation all the way back to like, let's take it to the Everglades perspective. If we're trying to protect ecosystems that rely on the Everglades functioning, right? And we don't first stop where the blood is coming from, so the development and overdevelopment of the land of Florida, right? If we don't first start there, then all of these measures we're putting in place in terms of legislation to protect individual species is like putting a band-aid over a bullet hole. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but I'm saying that the importance that we put on looking at these conversations on a microscopic scale really just don't add up to much until we address problems on the foundation of all of this. So,
I
this
mean,
bill, go for it, Em.
yeah, that's true. But just talking about the Everglades, so there is a problem there. We do have a problem with an apex predator, the python, right? So, it keeps multiplying. I think 98% of mammals in the Everglades are
That's a
gone.
weird thing too. I don't agree with the. I don't think those numbers are real.
Yeah,
No.
got a python. Yeah.
Nice.
Uh,
All
I
right,
don't
Florida
believe.
Steve Irwin, good job.
I know this it might be controversial, but a lot of people I talk to as well feel the same way. I don't think those numbers are accurate at all.
Well, that's
Um,
good.
I
Great
think
then.
so for as an example, they use the term that 98% of the small mammals in the Everglades are just gone because of the python. Well, I don't know how many of them have actually been to the Everglades. Now, this of course is firsthand accounting. I mean, how many times have you been there, Sergey? Every single time you go there, what do you see?
But there, I see. I mean, where I go, I see possums, sometimes raccoons. Yeah.
Cats, all sorts of stuff. My
Well,
my my
cats if
re-
I'm like my development. Yeah.
Yeah, raccoons have moved to developed areas, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
them, because it's just easier. You go to the edge of the Everglades and you will never not find a raccoon.
Smart like a
Like
Yeah.
shark.
Yeah.
I have
the,
lots of raccoons here.
yeah, the raccoons. So, like, my point in saying this is that we can call on that one study that was done and say 98% of the small mammals are gone because of the Burmese python. It's a good scapegoat. Don't get me wrong, it's an issue, but in reality, in my eyes, were the same numbers that are calling on, like, well, what about the bear thing? It's no different than looking at the bear numbers and being like, well, their numbers are back. Look at this number study from 2014 or 2015. A lot's changed since then. It's the
Right.
exact same thing because that
That's
study is
all the
years and years
years. Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to call back on the apex predator thing real quick. Um, in nature, the way that it works is that when the prey population booms, there's two things that can happen. Either the population crashes because there's not enough food, or disease wipes it out. And the other thing that could happen is that the predator population can then go up too because now they have more food, and then it's the exact same situation. There's a couple of different ways to do it, but one goes up, the other one goes up, and then one of them crashes and the other one crashes, and it's a
Right.
flux. Now the whole idea, and that's how it used to always be. You had these giant, like locusts, as an example, these giant things, a locust going nuts because of, I mean, bugs are a little different now, but basically they went crazy because of over a couple of years, and then their populations would just crash, and it would take years for them to build up, and then they'd do big boom. The passenger pit, all these things.
Right.
Wolves are introduced into Yellowstone, reintroduced, and all of a sudden, now there's a ton of wolves there, and the populations of elk have come back down. Great.
Right. As they should. Yeah.
Yeah, as they should. There's a lot of those things where you shouldn't hunt a wolf in Yellowstone.
Right.
And
So,
so I get to finish up my point on that is that where we live, this is in Florida, there are a lot of people. There's a lot less land than there used to be. It's one thing if it's in Yellowstone or in Alaska, where, and I hate to even make this argument, because I understand how it sounds. But when we have a human population that's just not going to leave, those animals cannot sustain themselves in a certain to the levels they would before people were here. So there
Right.
might have been, 100,000 bears here before people came into the picture.
Yeah,
But
there's no going back to the 1800s.
yeah, so but and again, that's what I'm saying. There's a certain population we can sustain of any species based on
Yeah, but
the way things are now.
So here's my question in bringing this up, right? Because as being someone specifically with when I saw this bill, and by the way, guys, it's called the Florida Safe Seas Act, and it looks like it was sponsored by Daniel Webster, um,
The
who is
dictionary
Florida's
guy.
11th
Let's say the
congressional district.
founding
LOL, Dean.
I'm not. By the way, I don't know enough about this bill to advocate or
No,
not
and
for it.
I don't
Yeah.
either. I don't either. I really want to the very brief thing that's highlighted on this man's website that is sponsoring this act, this bill, says the Florida Safe Seas Act would prohibit the hand feeding of sharks in federal waters off the coast of Florida, therefore mirroring the current prohibition in Florida state waters. The state of Florida prohibits the feeding of all wildlife, including alligators, on state property. That seems to be the main driver here. I'm not going
What's
to take a
interesting?
stance
That
on
doesn't sound
banning
like it would
that
ban
right
shark
now.
diving, though.
No. So, but is that really how it's written in the bill? We'll have to read it and look
Yeah,
because
because
this
it's
is from the
interesting
man who's sponsoring it.
because it said
So,
the and this is based on his website.
yes.
It says that it's supported by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the Jupiter Dive Center, the American Sport Fishing Association, the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. So I can already see some interest there at play. The Jupiter Dive Center, I look into that because that stands, I would argue, almost against that. But
That's
Then it
interesting to
doesn't
hear
sound.
Jupiter Dive Center because Tanya, if I'm not mistaken, she's affiliated with them and she's the one who brought this to my attention as like,
This doesn't
oh my
sound right.
God.
It
No.
doesn't sound right because you got to
could be a
think too.
small
What about what about
percentage too.
what
Rodney
about people?
sits on the Florida Tarpon Trust, though, just to make that clear.
Yeah, it's a whole. It's mostly a good group, yeah. But yeah,
There's always a Rodney everywhere we go, which is fine. I'm not like anti Rodney Barretto. I'm anti people of his
You sure about that?
bias. Yeah, I'm positive. It's unfortunate that that man's become the punching bag for every example, but until I can find a better one.
the problem is this bill probably has hundreds. I shouldn't say that. It could potentially have dozens and dozens of stipulations. One of those, and it could be just a small thing, which is probably what I mean. It's in there somewhere. It could just be a small stipulation that has this big effect, but there could be. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of good with the bill, but if that part of the bill also includes, this other stuff, that's gonna be because
Yeah,
that's what I'm
how
seeing
it's
online.
written.
I
I'm
feel like
scared
it's just
to
about the
find out.
shark feeding. There is a quote from the owner of the Jupiter Dive Center here.
I'm trying to make sure I have
Yeah, I want to read the bill itself because I mean,
Mhm.
if I've learned anything, it's the way, and we saw this with the State Parks Act, right, where everyone was trying to put golf courses and pickleball courses in the state parks. It was very specific language in one sentence of the entire 58 whatever page bill
Mhm.
that could have had drastic loopholes within it. And
Right.
so that's where, and when it comes to like, the interpretation of the law and then putting that pressure on our police and like FWC in this case, for these law enforcement officers to be able to interpret the law accordingly and do their jobs well and like be praised for that, we first have to provide them with legislation that can be easily interpreted and enforced. I mean, back in 2019, when Allies made the push for no fin Florida, and simultaneously within that time frame, we saw the new onshore shark fishing regulations be updated about the type of hook you could use and that the shark had to stay
That
in the
was so
water.
dumb.
And
That was so dumb. I'm sorry. I'm
well,
sorry. It's a lot of
that's where Miss Kate got her start in like
the
giving a crap
land-based shark
about
fishing
sharks.
stuff
But
was advocated for people who didn't know anything about land-based shark fishing and how that actually worked. They were saying that they were putting puppies and stuff on hooks and like it was
okay, well, I don't know who told you that because I wasn't
because
exposed to any of that.
I was at a lot of some of the meetings where they talked about that. Like yeah. Anyway,
Well,
the point is that a lot it's no different. You just got to be careful with some of this too because when it comes to chumming as an example, I know that most boat captains, especially inshore captains, will get a ton of greenbacks or whatever bait they're using and chuck them out there to get stuff stirred up.
Yeah.
Is that considered now hand feeding sharks? Because
Yes.
sharks are going to eat
In
that
my
too.
mind, yes. If
So
we were gonna
like,
do this
yeah,
underwater, then above water is gonna, I would think, have very similar impacts. Because if it's dead food in the water, it's your hand feeding sharks.
yeah. Well, then would
Whether
that
you're
be
underwater
considered the
there,
same as like what about all the key in the keys? Okay, listen to this. What about robbies?
yeah,
You know,
uh-huh.
what
And
about hand
Right.
feeding the tarpon and there's sharks there too?
and
Yep.
this is where we walk a very this is what I love about our conversations as a board, guys, is that we tend to get to the bottom of these things, and this is where my brain just gets so excited. It's like
One of the
ecstasy for
things,
me.
one of the things that I think is always kind of interesting to bring up is we don't have, to a large degree, especially how we deal with nature, we don't have a perfectly natural, non-human way to navigate with most wildlife on Earth, especially the ones we have close, I guess, like for example,
Interactions
like
with.
fishing and all that. Like I agree with it. It's all that, but throwing back a fish you catch on a line it's better for the fish, but it's not exactly not invasive. So like feeding, like I think like feeding a couple tarpon on a dock, I'm fine with that. I don't like if you're not causing cataclysmic decline of tarpon, you're not inevitably hurting them, you're not doing all this bad stuff. And I
Yep.
think the flaw with like, well, we have to keep it as natural as possible. It's like, nah,
Let's
that's not really how things are going. We're at a rate in our size of our intrusion in wildlife, and part of it is, are we a part of nature? Are we above it? Either way, we're going to deal with it regardless. So it's feeding a few fish in this specific about tarpon. That's not the end of the world. Is feeding some
right.
shark right before like is the enticing of sharks right before a dive one thing? Okay. But what about having a fish you could argue unnaturally on a line for hours that will also bring in sharks? That's not also very natural.
Yeah, and this is where good legislation is lives. It's in the gray area. I don't think government should be putting their hands into regulation unless it exists to protect gray area and give us strong enough boundaries to, at the same time, have the best interest for both people and wildlife. But that it's like a delicate conversation. It's a case by case situation. And I don't think we typically see that be brought to the table when it comes to legislation being built and constructed and then released into the wild, because so often our politicians are so focused on satisfying the feelings of the people crying for help, not actually producing a byproduct from a bill that's really going to facilitate the goal. Because oftentimes it doesn't look the way we want it to look. It's not going to look like telling everyone down at Robbie's they can't feed the tarpons, because what's the point in that? We don't have any sort of detrimental impact from that we can without.
Oh, well,
It's
you're
so.
changing the tarpon to go to Robbie's to stay
We're
there
changing
and
the
eat
black
and
bears
live.
to come to developed areas to eat out of trash can.
Yeah. I
Are we
Yeah,
going
I
to
think
know,
start
I agree.
holding, you know what I mean? Like,
We can get
what
all
Sergey's
the way
saying
into the
is
weeds.
accurate.
I
Yeah,
agree.
what
I
you
agree. I'm
can't
saying,
blanket statement any of this.
yeah.
But with the shark diving in particular, I think what we're going to find is that the stipulations of being so far removed from civilization in the natural habitat, hand feeding sharks, this is going to open up a can of worms for exactly what you're saying, Dean. So if we can't feed sharks underwater, what is, let's define feeding sharks. Chumming is going to bring sharks about. We have bull sharks everywhere. Like, I don't care if you're in the ocean or not, they're there. Like, these things, I'm surprised they're not on land yet, because they're everywhere. Like,
Sharknado
um,
is coming.
yeah, so it's just like, I hope that here's the hope that I have for Florida Keepers. I hope that we, as leaders of this type of conversation, can take everyone on all the spectrums of all of these subjects that we're getting at, right? I hope we can get everyone to a big table. And I hope we can find what are the key problems and how can we help this piece of legislation be either shifted, tilted, tweaked, whatever, in order to actually get to the bottom of doing something productive. It might not feel good for everybody, but like fuck your feelings. But I want it to be productive from like a science perspective, from a reality perspective, from a remove your emotional blinders. Let's look at this from the information that we have access to. Let's try it. Let's give it some time to breathe and let's see what happens. Because now that we've been doing this for what? I mean, 10 plus years commercially, and if you grew up in Florida, I'm sure you've been doing this like forever. So let's give it some time to see what happens. Kind of like they did with the black bear hunt. I mean, they took 10 years off of the black bear hunt. So maybe we could give it 3 years of saying no feeding sharks. And guess what, anglers? This means no chumming. I mean, that's like, I'm sure every fisherman on the face of the planet wants to
They're
live
not going to do
flood me
that
right
because
now, but
fishing is one of the main reasons that people like one of the huge tourist attractions. And if captains
you
can't
mean to tell
chum,
me we can't go fishing without chumming?
you can, but you're not going to get the what you
Why?
why?
Why though? Why won't
Have
you?
have you I don't chum normally because I don't use live bait. I use artificial pretty much only.
Okay.
But
Look,
I have been on plenty of boats. Like if you want to get if snook are not eating, if snook are not feeding, you can't get them to go. You see them up under the mangroves. You see them cruising around, but they don't. You throw individual greenbacks at them or a lure, whatever, and they're not
yeah.
touching anything. You got a client on that boat, and you can't get them to eat. Guess what? Your economy for those types of people gone.
Right.
So,
But then
and
you
this,
Yeah.
throw out some greenbacks, get them fired up. You got happy clients that are going to come back to you.
So
well,
what's
we
the
don't throw out
difference between that and the shark diving?
Right.
boom.
And real quick on the just for the specification. So, because right now you have to be in federal waters to even have the shark diving, which is 3.4 miles offshore. And so in Florida, you technically can't do it in Florida state waters. So that's why generally you have to go far enough out. And so essentially with this whole new federal stipulation, it would essentially take out any opportunity off the coast of Florida at all. You couldn't do it in state waters now, but you could do it in federal waters up until this bill, if it's passed with this stipulation.
Oh, oh,
Right.
that's well. You got to think of people like Mark the Shark too. Which, by the way,
Mm.
I don't know if you know who that is. I can't
Duh.
stand the dude.
You don't
Are you?
like Mark the Shark? I'm shocked. I thought you would
He
have
kill he
been a
kills sharks just
proponent
for the
of,
sake of killing sharks.
but
I
he
don't.
doesn't intentionally kill sharks. And if he
Yes,
does,
he
he's going
does.
after his bag limit. Listen, I've done my fair
I,
share of witnessing people. I've never met the man myself, so I can't speak from personal experience. But this man is not shy from the camera, and he's not shy about his beliefs or his
oh yeah.
practices. And yeah, if you hook a great hammerhead and you reel it into the boat, is it going to die? Most likely. Are you going to get punished for it? No, because you didn't intentionally kill it. Intentionally, you know what I mean? You didn't catch it to harvest it. You technically released it. It swam away. So,
It's more of letting his like grandkid like smack girls' butts on the boat and posting videos about it. That's anyway. That's just me.
Oh wait, we
That's
have more. Okay, never mind.
but anyway. I don't know. Just because I am not, just because I say something is like I support it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to ever do it, if that makes sense. I support the bear hunt if it was like if as long as the numbers were there. I don't have a desire to go hunt a bear.
right.
That it's that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah, well, and I think again this conversation I just hope that as we all come together to have this conversation around this bill because it's going to stir up the waters in Florida 100%. It
Hmm.
always does when these bills get introduced of trying to regulate shark diving. I hope that we have the ability as Florida keepers to help people have constructive conversations around this and that if the regulations are, excuse me, are implemented, that they're effective and they respect gray area, but at the same time, they find that balance so that when regulation is put in place and we now have FWC interactions to try and hold people accountable to new regulations, I just hope that it was done well enough that it can actually be applied and not just create more problems for everybody. Because the last thing we need is more anger, and which is what a lot of miscommunication and misinterpretation creates.
Right, and I think
So,
kind of the blanket is like someone's essentially because we agree we're going to be intensively somehow in nature, especially in the front here with sharks and marine life.
yeah.
But should one group's preference and their use of the natural resource be trump another person's? Probably not. Whether it's the
Mm-mm.
fishermen bringing sharks through the just fishing, and that's what happens. You're going to see sharks generally if you do that. And also, if you're a diver and enticing sharks, both are bringing in sharks. It's going to be something that happens, and especially that's where I think the argument gets flawed is when it's like, well, we don't want you guys to do what you're doing, but we want to keep doing what we're doing. It's like,
Right.
well, if we're both going to be using this resource, not everyone's going to be perfectly happy, with, maybe some conflicts or there's too many sharks arriving too soon or the enticement does have effects for sure.
Yeah. Or maybe just, I mean, and this sounds awful. I bet you that a lot of, I think this is very, me not knowing quite how to use like partisan parties to help understand where I stand on things, but I think Republicans are going to hate that I say this. Um, maybe if we just have less shark diving companies and make it harder to become one of these companies and make it more
Doesn't
limited so
sound
that
free to
there's
me.
not so that it's not
So
so many,
there's a
so
monopoly
much.
now. Are
Yeah,
you
I think that makes
advocating
it
for
worse.
monopolies?
No,
That's
no.
competition.
So
I want lower shark diving prices.
down
More
down in
output,
Key
please.
West. Okay, here's the example that this was inspired by. Down in Key West, there's a limited number of licenses that can be purchased for example, like taxi services. And once all of those licenses are used within the community, you can't have more. And it's to kind of keep like a ratio, a balance of what works for the roadways and what works for the people and like
Yeah, but it sounds good, but at the end of the day, there's always corruption behind that, and it's gonna be the same people that keep getting the licenses and essentially a monopoly.
well then don't we isn't this where we elect officials that are going to ensure that it's not corrupt?
That's not going to ever happen. That's like saying communism is going to work as long as we do it this way.
God, guys, I thought Florida Keepers was aiming for utopia. Is that not the standard that we're all going
Utopia
for?
is a
Um,
farce.
Better.
There's no
Yeah,
such thing as
better.
utopia.
yeah, and I'll just tell you from experience, living in a post-communist country, it doesn't work like that.
Then if it's
Where's the
not,
Soviet
if it's
national anthem? Let's get that going.
here's my final 2 cents on this then, and I'm curious to see how my mindset shifts about this as we go down the path of the next couple weeks following this bill. But here's where I stand with it today. If we're going to take something like feeding sharks, and this says hand feeding, so it didn't say anything about, from my understanding, dropping a crate of
Icing
fish
shark.
down to the bottom, right? So chumming's okay, but hand feeding, it's like I don't know. I just if the shark divers are gonna have to give up baiting the sharks in, and maybe the word's not baiting, that's probably gonna be a terrible word to use in the long run, but this is how I'm gonna communicate about it today. If baiting the sharks is not allowed, if keeping the shark's attention and a distance and controlling the shark's behavior with a fish in your hand is not allowed, then the fishermen who are complaining about these sharks being a nuisance need to have some sort of stipulation to help fix the problem. If they're going to complain about the problem, then they're going to have to give something up to help fix the problem. And science should be the thing that directs that. And if we don't have science to direct that choice, then
I
we
think they're
need
saying
science
the
to direct that
enticing
choice.
is the problem. That's what I think the argument is. They're saying the bill proponents are arguing that it is the problem. So like getting
What?
rid of it would be the solution. In their eyes. I don't agree with it, but that's what they're thinking.
Oh, well, it can't be that extreme. You can't ask someone to give up an entire industry.
Right.
That
Yeah.
would be us like that
Yeah.
would be like shark divers saying, or you could just stop fishing this water,
Right.
which is insane. Like, but it's the same ask.
I don't
So,
think any of this is the solution at all. And I think
what do
they're
you think
trying
is
to
the
act.
solution, Dean?
I don't have that solution right now. I don't
Do you
know
have
the
ideas?
exact solution, but I don't think this is it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not
I
claiming.
agree.
See, I don't know how many times I've told you this, and I'll wrap it up pretty quick. Like, I am in school for wildlife conservation because I
Mhm.
wanted to know what I was like dealing with when I instead of just spouting random stuff basically. And the more I learn, the more I realize that most people who do talk about stuff haven't are just going mostly based on feelings, and I feel like this is based on feelings. I don't think this is actually going to do anything.
You think the whole bill, this whole act that's being proposed is based on feelings, the
From
entire structure of it.
instead of actually, like as you said, going with the science. Oh well,
Right.
we'll just ban the hand feeding.
Right.
Yeah, because as you said, fishing is not going to stop. They're
Yeah.
still
Right.
attracted to boats because of fish on lines. It's not going to
Yeah.
change any of that.
And the history
So
of being fed is not going anywhere. That's gonna have to be something that gets corrected over time.
I
If
don't
it's
think
going
any
to
of
be
this.
corrected
I don't
over
think
time.
any of this matters. Yeah, I think this is just to make themselves feel good about themselves. But that's
So
my
should we
opinion.
just try to get the bill killed? Is that the right
I'd have
thing
to look
do
over the
then?
entire bill, but I mean, it sounds pretty crappy to me.
Yeah.
That's fair. I'm always a fan of less regulation,
Yeah,
to be honest. Like at the end of the day, if there's not a really precious gray area
Let's
that needs
wrap
to be
up,
protected,
guys. Yeah.
um, well, I can just cut myself off in the middle of my thought. That's fine.
We'll just
My thoughts are long. It's
including,
fine.
including thought. We can edit it. Yeah.